loving God. Amen. Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 7 reads as follows. Seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. My brothers and sisters, today I'm going to preach from the book of Jeremiah, the Old Testament prophet. And the title of my sermon is that as we're looking forward to Stewardship Sunday on October 20th, we are all stewards in Jerusalem or Babylon. We are all stewards, caretakers of this earth creation in Jerusalem or Babylon. God's gift of imagination is simply the ability of the mind to be creative or resourceful, and it is one of life's most useful assets. The gift of imagination, it can help us to negotiate reality and to envision what we can be. Imagination can also lead us into mere daydreaming. In this case, people at times can lose their grasp of reality. When our imaginations prevent us from attending to real life, then they simply become yet another way to sidestep the truth. The Hebrew lesson today from the prophet of Jeremiah, it cites part of a letter that Jeremiah wrote to those whom Nebuchadnezzar had taken into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. No doubt these exiles were despondent over losing their way of life, the temple, and every visible sign of their home. And yet Jeremiah offers us words of encouragement, hope, and guidance. These words that 2,600 years later, Christian stewards can appeal for guidance as well. God has blessed the chosen people for centuries as occupants of the land that God had given them, as stated in Jeremiah chapter 11, verse 5, a land flowing with milk and honey. Around 597 BCE, and that's before the Common Era or before Christ, the nation found itself without land, without the temple, and without a home. Nation's interest was at hand, and there was lots of talk about subversion and defiance. But as always, here Jeremiah is akin to a fish swimming against the current. Instead of lamenting the exile situation, Jeremiah offers encouragement. He says, build houses and plant land, gardens, take wives and multiply there. Seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. How strange. Jeremiah counsels to those exiles should not surprise those familiar with the prophet's tendency to offer peculiar words from the Lord. Jeremiah has made a prophetic career of doing the offbeat and the uncanny thing of foreseeing trouble and dread ahead. When the nation faces doom and gloom, we read in Jeremiah chapter 32, verse 9, that he buys a field from his cousin Hanamel. The Lord's word via Jeremiah encourages the exiles to embrace the welfare of the city where I have sent you. This is a good work for the stewards as well. We all know people who are never quite satisfied with life's circumstance. At many of the annual parish conferences, meetings that I have attended, I have not attended one here yet, but at many of those, I have heard a lot of lay people hint that if only they had a different preacher, then their church would thrive. Ironically, In the clergy cluster, some clergy simply says to, if only they had a better church, a bigger church, a church with more ASA, average Sunday attendance, then their gifts and graces would shine. In each case, overactive imaginations avoid a truthful assessment of reality. I can recall some decades ago where a Roman Catholic priest, and I don't remember his name, he said to me in his wisdom that all of us tend to play that if only game. If only I had gone to a different school. If only I had married someone else. If only I had chosen a different path, a different career. This game allows us to avoid dealing with our own reality. You see, Jeremiah's words benefit faithful stewards because he suggests to the exiles that God will not return to recreate the past. The past, my brothers and sisters, is the past. Instead, Jeremiah helps the people to recognize that the only true reality is the one that they live in now, the present, the now in Babylon. A tempting excuse to avoid managing those gifts that God has given us is to discount them. But as if you remember in one of the other Gospels, Gospel of St. Mark, chapter 12, verses 41 to 44, the poor widow here reminds us it is not the size or quality of the gift that matters. Instead, it is the heart and the faith from which we stewards offer our gifts to God. So, whether we are stewards living in Jerusalem or Babylon, God calls stewards to be faithful where God plants us. I can remember that phrase, and many of you probably do too. To bloom where you're planted. In other words, wherever you are, whether you're in Gastonia, whether you're in Greensboro, or wherever you are, to do the will and the work of God. Don't let anything stop you. And we are also called to do the work on behalf of others as well, and that includes our enemies. So this morning, in closing, this is good news for us. It's good news because as stewards taking care of all of God's creation and nature, this message, this ancient message, is just as relevant for us today as well. So your charge this morning and this week is to look around. Just look around right here in your own backyard. Look around and get to know the people and the place where we are living. Look around and see the contribution that many of you are making and the well-being of others. We're not only called to look around, but we also are called to take notice of what's going on in our city, what's going on in our church, what's going on with our people and our families and our neighborhoods and our schools and our government. Look around. And while we are looking around, let us make sure that we are caring for the welfare, for the well-being of our city, for our church and our schools and others. Let us not forget to pray. Prayer cures 90% or more of our social ills. There are times that we are racking our brain day after day, week after week, year after year on some social injustices and matters of our world. But you know, we are not in control. Did you hear me say that? We are not in control. The sovereign Lord, the one Lord who died for us, that is the Lord who will cure most of our social ills. And so that's why one of the beauties of the Episcopal Church is that we do have prayers of the people, which we're about to lift up each other in prayer, to lift up our cities and our governments, to lift up our families, to lift up our schools, to lift up some of the isms, the racism and the sexism and all the kind of isms that is a barrier from us doing God's work, which is to love God with all our heart, with all our mind. And while we're at it, love our neighbor as ourselves. So look around, pray, take care of the city, and be it whether in Jerusalem or Babylon, we are called as God's stewards to care for all. And I say all you all you people. God bless you and God love you. Amen.